We're going to give you the ability to analyze space. The final frontier. Wait a minute, I'm not combining Star Trek and Space Odyssey, aren't I? You can, and you should, analyze pretty much everything. When you come out of high school, you're very much aware that novels are something you should analyze, that poems are something you should analyze, that plays, that historical documents, but it really goes deeper than that. If you learn how to analyze absolutely everything, nothing will ever take you by surprise. How do you do this? Gore Vidal, if there was ever a cool writer, it was him, once said, anyone who's not paranoid is not in full possession of the facts. That's a pretty interesting claim, isn't it? I don't think it's so much necessarily being in possession of the facts, but being able to extrapolate meaning out of them. And that brings us to how to do analysis, which is the subject of today's video. And I'll argue that there are many methods for doing analysis, but this particular one has 4 steps. First step is description. Describe something in as much detail as you can humanly imagine. Go deep. Go as specific as you possibly can. Go in depth. Now, we could just jump on from there, but I think this is going to work better if you actually try this a little bit. So what I want you to do is I want you to pause the video and spend a little bit of time describing a classroom. Yeah, a classroom. You've been in tons of them. Well, not right now, but you've been in tons of them before. You know the typical features that take place in the typical class. What are they? Get as nitpicky and specific as you possibly can. Go ahead. Pause now and do it. Did you do it? Do you have a big, long list? Cool. Now, when most people think of a classroom, the first thing they tend to think about are the desks involved. However, they're not really desks, at least not in this sense. They're kind of a combination of a desk and a chair. So if we can't really call them desks, we should really call them what they are, a chest. Now, most chests, see, it's a hard habit even for me. Most chests nowadays tend to have baskets underneath them, so you have somewhere to put your books. So this is no longer just a desk plus a chair. It's also a desk plus a chair plus a basket. So, of course, we're going to call it a chesket. In the last couple of years, they've started adding a new type of chesket to the field house, and it's roundish. It's a little bit more maneuverable. The desk portion of it swings back and forth to give you a little bit more maneuverability. So, because it's kind of round, I think we should call this one a Cheska saucer. So that's the chesks, and the cheskets, and the Cheska saucers. But that's not enough level of description. We have to get into what actually these particular pieces of furniture are like. So, first thing we know about cheskets is that they tend to have graffiti on them, carved onto the top. Maybe something smart like this, maybe something extraordinarily stupid, maybe someone calling someone a homophobic slur, maybe someone insulting the teacher. I see that one a lot more than I'd like to. I just wish people would go back to putting hand turkeys on desks. Anyway, the other thing we know about desks is that if we look underneath them, we are going to find a lot of gum. Why people can't throw away gum normally, I don't know. Maybe it's their own sense of rebellion coming out. Who knows? Now, what is a desk made out of? Chances are, it looks like wood, but is it wood? Not really. It tends to be some kind of fake wood. usually a fiberboard material with a picture of wood put on top of it. Or maybe they're just giving up and not even pretending that it's wood and putting a straight fiberboard on. How are the cheskets arranged in the classroom? Tight rows pointing towards the front. Is there a lot of space between them? No, not really. Is the chesket big enough for everybody's stuff? Usually not. These are actually fairly big cheskets here. Usually the desk portion of a chesket is much smaller than this. And plus, if you notice, this school apparently doesn't like anyone who's not white. Anyway, are all the desks like the chesks in a normal classroom? Of course not, because there's a teacher desk. How's the teacher desk different? It's bigger. It's taller. It has more storage and more workspace. And if there is going to be technology anywhere in the room, it's going to be up there. Why is it taller? Oh, we're getting ahead of ourselves. We're still on description. Every classroom has either a chalkboard or a whiteboard. They're moving towards whiteboards from chalkboards. Personally, I prefer the chalkboards because they will erase all the way, where whiteboards don't necessarily do that. Plus, you know when chalk is going to run out, and you have no clue as to when an ink pen is going to run out. About the only advantage is that sometimes the ink pens smell like vodka. I hear rumors that some classrooms have smart boards, but me personally, I have never been in a room with one of them. The classrooms I've tended to teach in do usually have a projector hooked up to the computer so I can shove stuff up on a screen. However, as recently as 10 years ago, I taught in classrooms which still had overhead projectors. Do you remember the overhead projector? Not pretty. I could have also put in a picture of the combination TV / VCR on an AV cart, but hopefully those are going away. Every classroom also has a clock. What are the chances of that clock actually working? Not particularly great. I'd say about 50-50 as a rule. There's carpet on the floor. Is it nice carpet? No, it's this ultra industrial stuff that is designed not for comfort or looks, but bulletproofness, I guess. If your classroom isn't carpeted, chances are there will be some kind of rubber or linoleum-like tile, usually in some of these shades of colors, too. You know, the stuff that kind of looks like stone, but not really in any sense? That's what we're talking about. So that's the floor. What about the walls? I have seen an awful lot of painted cement block in my time. It's a durable material. That's about the best you can say for it. Is it always painted white? No, but there is a range of colors out there that it tends to get painted. You've got a lot of off-whites, a lot of off-yellows, a lot of off-blues. If you're venturing into the red territory, it's going to be these dullish colors over to the left of the screen. You might go to browns. If you go into yellows, it's going to be this kind of palish yellow. It's a very consistent color scheme. They're kind of dull colors. Why is that? Oh, we're getting ahead of ourselves again. So we've covered the walls, the ceiling, the cheskets. We haven't covered the ceiling. We need to talk about the ceiling because it's almost always some kind of ugly drop tile. And a decent percentage of the time, that drop tile has water stains on it. You know the water stains. Sometimes if you're in a really bad place, you'll see the water stains on the floor as well. There used to be a building on the UT campus called the Student Annex, which I swear was probably just a few double wides welded together, and every classroom I taught in there had stains on it. What else? Well, there's usually lights. Are there good lights? No, they're probably fluorescent lights that don't make anybody look all that good. They might be parabolic lights like this where the light's reflected off of something. They might be louver lights. You get warm, healthy glow in these rooms? No, not really. So why did they pick them? Well, we're getting ahead of ourselves yet again. See, it's kind of hard to stop going for the analysis in here. But at the first part, you just want to describe. Classrooms might have a podium. It might be a stand on its own thing like this, or it might be a desktop model. I've even seen some desks where the top of the desk comes up to act like a podium for the teachers. So that's description. We could go a lot more into it, but we've got the basics. The next step is to look for patterns. What are the patterns that tend to recur? What are the things we see happening over and over again? And being able to find patterns is a real analytical skill, and it's one that can really yield you benefits. I think there's patterns at work in most places, and the ability to discover them means you can start to think about what they mean. But let's stick to just the patterns now. Standard classroom. You've all seen something that looks sort of like this. What patterns do we see? Well, materials seem to be picked for durability only, not looks. You don't get good looking stuff. You get industrial looking stuff. You get stuff that's very hard to destroy, that's very hard to mark. Cinder block walls, whatever material they make the desks out of. I taught in a classroom where somebody had broken off part of one of the desks, and I didn't even think that was possible. Which brings us to the second thing. Even though the materials seem to be picked primarily for durability, they're still in a state of disrepair for some reason. Stuff is dingy. Stuff is broken. Stuff is stained. In terms of appearance, not much looks all that good. Everything is cold and institutional looking. Dull colors. All the cheskets are pointed towards the teacher. All the cheskets are tight together in rows pointed towards the teacher. Students have very little space. There's little space in between cheskets, so you can't really turn around and talk to someone at the other side of the room. You can basically look forward. However, the teacher's desk has a lot of space. There's room to roam. The desk is taller and bigger and has more space on it. Is it because teachers bring more stuff with them to class? I usually bring a pencil case, a roll book, and a sheet of paper. That's about it. So why do I have more space? Asking these questions, why are these patterns there, is the next big stage. Look for the meaning of those patterns. Why, for instance, would we want stuff that's picked primarily for durability? Well, it says something, possibly, about how the institution sees you students as destructive little bastards. Why would they not get at least good-looking stuff? Well, they're cheap. If you're painting stuff off color, off whites, off beiges, making stuff out of indestructible but nondescript looking materials, what does that remind you of? Is it a light, breezy open space that reminds you of a nice lounge? Or is it more akin to a prison? Well, we don't have toilets sitting out in the middle of the room, thank goodness. But the same indestructibility seems being the prime component behind the purchasing decisions. Well, there's something there. Why do I have a lot of space and you have very little? Why is everything pointed towards me? Is it possible to get into a nice, good group discussion in a classroom where all the desks are jammed together? No. It's very hard because you can't really turn around in a lot of classrooms because they're packed. There is a top-down structure to the classroom. You have little space. I have a lot of space. You're lined up in rows towards me. I have room to roam. I've got a taller desk. You've got a smaller desk. Is it because I need a taller desk? No, it's because a taller desk makes me look more important. Remember that podium we showed earlier? Well, that's another sign that whoever stands behind this must be a source of knowledge. And you know what a classroom is going to be like when someone sits behind that podium. Stands behind the podium, shuffles papers. They're going to talk. They're not going to discuss. They're not going to ask. They're going to talk. What do they expect from you as students? They expect you to sit down, shut up, write down what the teacher says, Soak up the teacher's knowledge like your brain is a sponge. Then regurgitate that knowledge on the test. That's your job. Is it to create? No. You learn passively in a room that's set up like that, where the teacher stands behind the podium and lectures at you. This brings us back to the steps of analysis. We looked for patterns. We've come up with some possible meanings for those patterns. The institution designs classrooms because they think you're destructive little bastards who need to just shut up and listen to the brilliance of the teacher. Now, does that mean that they're consciously thinking that when they design a classroom? I don't necessarily think it does, but it's clearly the best use for the space. I've taught in classrooms in a college business building where it looks like a board meeting room because they want their classroom to mirror what the professionals in the field will actually do. I have taught in classrooms in educational buildings where you got lots of wide open space and big windows. That's not how classrooms normally are, though. Classrooms are normally set up to where if I want to get people to talk, it's hard because nobody can look at each other. It's designed to facilitate top down. Then we get to the final question of analysis. Significance. Why should we care? Hopefully at this point, I don't really have to tell you why you should care about your college education. Somebody is paying a lot of money for it. Probably you. Maybe your parents. Maybe you've got some scholarships, but will they cover everything? Yeah. Even if you're not directly paying money now, you're probably taking out loans, which will put you in debt for a long, long time. Trust me on this one, because it's been like 17 years for me and I'm still paying off college loans. So we have an invested interest in how a classroom runs because we're all directly involved in that space. And we have or are paying for it. At the top of this video, we brought up the Gore Vidal quote that anyone who's not paranoid doesn't know all the facts. And I'm reminded of another good quote. Salvador Dali, there's only one difference between a madman and me. The madman thinks he is sane. I know I am mad. Well, what is the difference between a madman and a sane person, really? Think about how I just described the classroom. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, doesn't it? They want you to sit down and be brainwashed. Well, there's a big difference between me making a conspiracy theory and me making an argument. It's evidence. And that's why we describe in as much detail as possible, because the more we describe, the more clear the patterns become. The more clear the patterns become, the easier it is to interpret them and to find the significance in them. It's always important to remember that everything has a point of view, even spaces. Someone is designing them and they usually have some thought in mind as to how that space is going to be used. And it's one of the things that architects are trained to do, is to subtly shift the environment to get the right behavior out of people. I'm not saying it's necessarily a grand conspiracy, but there is intentionality behind it. And even if they're not consciously thinking about, how can I manipulate people? It happens. So focus on the fact that there is meaning in things. And the more you look for that meaning, hey, it's going to be easier to find. See you in the next video.